Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on navigating the Home Ministry's guidelines on opening up businesses. Today's webinar will be hosted by Mr. Kushank Sindhu, who is a partner at Sigma Chambers and an alumnus of Nalsar University of Law at Hyderabad.
Hello, good evening. Hi, I'm Kushank Sindhu. Thank you for the introduction, Abhinav. Right. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today on this presentation. The thing is that given the COVID crisis, there are a lot of companies, etc., who had obviously stopped functioning, and there is a ray of hope now with the MHA basically lifting the lockdown in a limited fashion. And there is obviously hope because people want to sort of restart functioning of their businesses. So it was in this context that we wanted to have this presentation. Before we actually sort of get into the guidelines, it is very important for us to understand as to why we are having this presentation. The the Ministry of Home Affairs had come out with guidelines, and guidelines by nature are supposed to guide. Guidelines are supposed to be, they have to advise, they have to tell you what you have to do. But imagine a situation that tomorrow you start opening your business or your establishment or factory, and there are workers who are coming, and unfortunately, as is happening in most other places, they get infected from the coronavirus. Are you liable as the employer, as the business owner? There might also be situations where employees do not want to come to work. Can you actually force them to come out of their houses and join work? Is that permissible under the law? Can you actually do it? Thirdly, imagine a situation where tomorrow you get, say, 50% of your employees who want to join, who want to start working. And then, unfortunately, because of certain reasons, they face some kind of harassment at the workplace. Now, the law dictates under the Prevention of Sexual Harassment at Workplaces Act that you need to have a system in place to deal with sexual harassment, work harassment, etc. Do you have those things in place? How do you deal with those situations? Because why is all this so important? Why are the guidelines so important? The guidelines had clearly laid down that you can start operating your businesses to some extent and in certain sectors which are permitted. Not all of them. Be very clear about this. Just because the guidelines have come out and just because the press says that the lockdown has been partially lifted, you will have to know very carefully whether or not your business and you can actually start functioning. So in this webinar, as the scope of the webinar is limited to understanding the guidelines as to how you can start functioning in this change scenario, whether or not you can start functioning, and how is it that you should go about dealing with the government regulations, your business objectives, and ensuring business process continuity. Now, given we always have all kinds of guidelines and laws and regulations, it is important for you to know that the guidelines as such are extremely important, because non-fulfillment of the guidelines can lead to imprisonment, can lead to jail, can lead to penalty being imposed, not just on the company as such, but also right up to the level of, say, the factory manager, who can be held liable in certain cases. And that is very important for you to understand. Tomorrow, if someone comes and because of certain laxity, the person contracts a virus, or as the law says, it leads to loss of life or imminent danger, you can be held liable and you can go to jail for up to 2 years for any kind of non-compliance. It does not matter if you are the director, far removed from the situation. It does not matter at all, because in certain situations you can still be held liable, and that is very important for you to understand. Now, there is a step-by-step analysis law-wise as to how you should go about in this change scenario. To begin with, you should first see whether or not your your factory or your establishment is located in what is known as a hotspot or a containment zone. And that is very important. Why is that so? Because as far as your hotspots and containment zones are concerned, the law states that in these situations, you have to consult your local medical department. You have to consult the Ministry of Health because they would be coming out with their own guidelines. Just because your factory is located in the hotspot and or containment zone, it means that you would not be covered by the guidelines which have been given out handed out by the Home Ministry. In those situations, check with your health department as to what are the rules and what is it that you can actually do. If you do not fall in a hotspot or a containment zone, you will have to see and whether or not your industry is actually allowed to operate. The guidelines themselves provide for a three-way analysis or a three-way distinction that has been drawn. The red industries are those which are absolutely prohibited. Ensure that your industry does not fall in the red category or in the red zone. Because if it does, then there is absolutely, you can't, and it's impossible for you to function. And again, as I said, if you do start functioning, you can be held liable under law, which can lead to imprisonment or jail. The yellow or amber industries are those industries which are allowed, but with certain restrictions. And obviously, the green industries are those which are permissible without any restrictions. However, keep in mind that apart from the MHA guidelines, you will also have to see what your state government has actually allowed. There are a lot of states which do not allow any kind of industry to function. For instance, Telangana, there the lockdown has been extended. For instance, New Delhi, Delhi has extended the lockdown. But look at Haryana, you look at Uttar Pradesh, to a limited extent, you can start operating. Whether or not you can, whether or not that is allowed, that you will have to check because the local regulation, the local circular will differ. And just one more thing, keep in mind that what's good for the gander may not be ideally good for the goose. There is no a universal rule that fits everybody. One size fits all approach does not matter, does not operate in this, at least now, at least in the corona crisis. Every unit, every establishment is different. Apart from this, ensure that you have made an objective analysis of the rules, that whether or not you are actually covered by them. Just because your friend in your MBA class is also doing the same thing may or may not apply to you. So don't do it. After you have understood that you can operate your company, understand that it requires a lot of coordination and cooperation with the local administration. The local administration involves interacting with the police, the health official, and what is known as the incident commander. The police station is usually the primary institution you go to for your passes, for all kinds of permissions, because they are enforcing these guidelines at the ground level. When you look at the health department, that is also very important because when it comes to containment zones, when it comes to even buffer zones, it is a health official who will tell you what you can and what you can't do. The incident commander is something known as, they are basically magistrates. They are basically magistrates which have been appointed to assist in the compliance of these regulations. Now, understand that you really need to have a team which can go around and which can coordinate with these departments and these officers. Now, as far as the impact on sectors is concerned, that is actually what forms the core of the whole thing, and it's actually the sort of the biggest concern that people have had as to what rule applies to what sector. The guidelines themselves are extremely clear. While we are looking specifically at 4 to 5 sectors, but again, there are obviously a lot more sectors which have been covered. And that is something that you really need to understand, that what guideline covers what sector. there is a lot of ambiguity when it comes to this, and I will be explaining the ambiguity as we go along in this discussion. First of all, if you look at the IT and ITES sector, and this is again not just startups, but also obviously you have the bigger companies also who are dealing with IT and ITES. As far as the rules are concerned, you can operate with 50% of your staff. With 50% of your staff, you can operate these services. As far as IT manufacturing is concerned, there, however, there is no limitation that has been given, at least in the rules. But there is some ambiguity when it comes to this, which I will discuss later on, and which is important for you to understand where is it that you can confront the authorities and where is it that you can run into a lot of trouble. The second sector is the construction sector. The construction sector makes a distinction, the rules make a distinction between construction in the rural areas and construction in the urban areas. When it comes to the rural areas, the rules say that you can have new construction and to some extent you can have labor within the district to help you and come and work on the construction site. Of course, not all kinds of construction is allowed even in the rural areas. There is a limit, there are certain categories which have been mentioned and only those sectors are allowed. Apart from the rural areas, there is obviously also the urban areas. As far as the urban areas are concerned, it is very important to know that the rules say that you can continue construction. You can't start a new construction. That is a very important change that has been brought out. There has been an amendment in this, and the rules have been updated with regard to migrant labor. This is, as I think, as recently as today or yesterday, where the rules and the clarification has come up, which clearly says that because there are so many migrant labor and they have shifted to government shelters, how is it that you can actually work with these migrant labor? The rules say by themselves that they can go back to their establishment or wherever they were working earlier. That is permissible. But interstate transfer of this labor is not actually permissible. However, if they have to be transported and say suppose they reach the area wherever they were working on the construction site, do you have to accommodate everybody on the construction site, or can you actually ask them to be elsewhere? That is something which is not yet clear, and which is why you really need to go through the guidelines and see whether or not that kind of thing is actually applicable in your situation. The third thing is that when you come to logistics, as far as logistics are concerned, interstate and inter-district movement of individuals is allowed only for the activities which have been mentioned under these guidelines. That is one principle which the guidelines lay down. Apart from this, there is also the specific rule with regard to logistics, which put a limit on railways, where railways ordinary passenger traffic is not allowed, but you can transport goods and you can obviously use parcel trains. Trucks and other goods and carrier vehicles are allowed with 2 drivers and 1 helper. But the point that I'm making is, on the one hand, the guideline says that you can travel, but only for activities which are allowed in the guidelines. But on the other hand, when you look at logistics, the specific rule with regard to logistics, there is no such limitation that has been actually prescribed. So can we say that the logistics can work only for the activities which have been allowed under this rule? Again, it is a gray area. Secondly, I had started this whole webinar with describing that in certain cases, the MHA has said that the state government can have other rules and can have stricter norms. Delhi has said that they want to continue with the lockdown. Telangana has said so. There are other states which have said so. UP has virtually allowed these regulations to be adopted. However, there are certain areas, even in Noida and Greater Noida, where they will not still allow any kind of activity. So the point being, you have to check with your local and with your state administration what is the rule that is applicable, because not everything is. Apart from this, there is also the sector on hotels and hospitality. Now, when it comes to hotels and hospitality, they are one of the sectors which unfortunately they have faced a lot of, they have been at the receiving end of this crisis. But again, think it's not all doom and gloom all the time. It is not that bad when it comes to even hotels and hospitality, because the rules say that if you are giving support to tourists, etc., who have been stranded, apart from that, you can operate if you are giving support to the medical department and all these people who are at the front of fighting this battle. What my suggestion is that despite everything, these are ways in which you as a business can actually think of innovative ways of cooperating with the hotels, with the medical department, with the health department, and on the lines of certain things, with certain practices which have been carried on abroad. For instance, my friend had gone to New Zealand and on his honeymoon, and he is now stranded in his hotel. And for 3 months, he is stuck in his hotel. The hotel has offered him, obviously, they have to ask him to stay, and they have reduced the tariff which is applicable for such kind of guests. So that kind of an innovative business approach is what is actually required. And this principle can be extended not just to the conventional hotels and motels and hospitality, but also with regard to platforms which bring the landlord and the tenant together. With regard to startups and SMEs, a special mention needs to be made for these entities. Why is that so? Because at least the lockdown relaxation rules do not have a separate category of startups and SMEs, which is why they have to be all the more careful about what works from them and what does not. Now, obviously, a startup or an SME will fit, may or may not, but ideally, they should fit into some or the other sector which is covered by the law. Say, for example, you are a small startup with 5 people and you provide IT services. Now, the rules, as I will again explain later on, will do govern, and they say that primarily your employees can come to the workplace, but it is your responsibility as the employer to bring them onto the workplace. But can everybody afford that kind of a situation? That is something that you have to decide. Secondly, what is the nature of transport that you can provide? What if they are stopped in the middle? Do they need a curfew pass or do they not? And this problem can be faced with, frankly, any industry. That are the transport agreements, are the transport arrangements, do they comply with what is mentioned in the guidelines? This is something that requires an extensive analysis of the guidelines and its application to a few industries and to your industry as such. Similarly for SMEs, whether or not you can actually comply with these guidelines, it requires, quite frankly, an audit and a forecast. It requires your financial legal audit to objectively assess whether or not you can start functioning after the lockdown is lifted. Now, beyond the sector-wise specifications, the guidelines also make a distinction between manufacturing establishments, workspaces, and public spaces. Now, what is it that is actually covered by all this? Say, for example, you have a steel plant, for example. Now, within the steel plant, or within, for that matter, any factory, there will be certain places which are say roads or which are parks, which are gardens, which allow people to congregate, and they are congregating in the open. Now, a limitation has been placed that you can't congregate for more than 5 people. More than 5 people cannot come together. The other limitation that has been placed is that anybody who goes out, all the employees, they have to cover their face, they have to wear the face mask. Similarly, when it comes to confined spaces or workspaces, then you have to ensure that the norms of distancing, the norms of people not coming together, really, all those norms are practiced. all the norms in relation to staggering your work, ensuring people again at lunchtime, etc., do not come together. All those norms are practiced. And when it comes to manufacturing establishments, you have to ensure that your surfaces are safe and your surfaces are clean and they are hygienic, and there is a systematic cleansing which is going on. But again, why is it that we are following? Why is it that we need to care about all this? And that is so because the principal responsibility, the primary liability is on you. You as a director or the officer or the senior management to comply with these norms and understand that these norms are the minimum mandatory, that across the board in India, they have to be followed. State governments can have even stricter norms. They can have, again, as I said, they can say that absolutely there will be lockdown. For example, in Delhi, it does not matter what guidelines the government of India comes up with. In my state, I'm not going to allow anything. That is something that you have to be very clear about. Because if you do not, then unfortunately, people are going to jail and they can go to jail. Again, the rules as such are very unclear, which is why you need to be very careful about them. If there are employees who refuse to attend office, can you force them to come? Can you ask anybody to actually come without their consent when work can be done from home? If an employee contracts the virus at work, what happens? Are you held liable, or was it the employee's fault? Where did he or she contract the virus? Was it at work? Was it coming to work, or while returning from work? When it comes to leave of employees, can you ask people to sort of let go of their leaves? Can you ask people to let go of their wages? There is a Supreme Court petition which is pending, which has challenged the Ministry of Labour guidelines, where the Labour Ministry had said that no matter what, you have to continue paying wages. Is that really something which is practically and legally possible? Because are you covered by those rules? That is an objective analysis that you will have to do. Say, for example, there is a tobacco company. A tobacco company has an IT unit on its side. And the rules say that the IT unit can function with 50% of your strength. Are you covered by that? Or is the IT unit a part of the tobacco company? And tobacco company may or may not be allowed to function. So can the IT unit within the tobacco company function with 50% of its staff? That requires an analysis of what is the relationship between the tobacco company and the IT unit. That understanding is very important. That is the IT unit. The IT unit may be within the same area, within the same premises, but is it a separate legal entity? And what is the relationship between the IT unit and the tobacco company? That is the kind of analysis that is required. Now, the way in which startups and SMEs and etc. they work largely is that there are thresholds that they have to meet. Threshold when it comes to their the targets that they have with regard to sales, achieving certain level of revenue, etc. And if you do not do that, you do not get the next round of funding. And any company would obviously want funding. Does your agreement with your investor envisage this kind of contract between the investor and the investee? Is there some relaxation which has been provided? That is something that you will have to understand. Is the force majeure clause, has that been included? Whether or not the force majeure actually applies, whether or not it covers the situation, all these things are something which require an analysis of your contracts. We have had clients who have had problems with execution of contracts. You can have a contract, one person is sitting in say Delhi, the other person is sitting in Timbuktu. And both of them understand and they both agree online that they want to enter into such and such agreement in this lockdown period. On the one hand, you can obviously have an e-contract and all that jazz. But on a more conventional and practical level, not everyone is tech savvy. How do you execute contracts when it comes to that? Does someone sign at one place and the other person signs at the other end? And even after the signatures are done, where do you get the stamp duty from? How do you pay the stamp duty? Can you get a relaxation from the collector from payment of stamp duty? Is there any provision in your contract which provides for this? Or should you just delay the execution of contract? All these problems are arising, which unfortunately have not all of them have been covered by law, which requires certain amount of analysis and reading and application to your situation. But as I said, not all is doom and gloom. There are solutions that you can come up with. And again, as we said, that we have been advising clients on this front. And the first advice that we always give to clients is that there cannot be a one size fits all approach. You cannot apply the same thing that your neighbor is doing, or your friend from your MBA class or from law school is doing in his or her company. Not just company, even within the company, when there are separate establishments, you can't have the same principle applying to every establishment. And that changes. Why does that change? Because of the limitations that I have already told you. Whether or not your IT department can function as a separate entity, you have to know that. You have to analyze that. Fundamentally, ensure that you communicate well with your employees and your local authorities, which is related to the third solution, which I said, that you have a setup which has an in-house as well as an external team for assistance. The moment you communicate clearly with your employees as to what the solution, what the problem is, without raising a hue and cry, without raising unnecessary alarm, but alert them to what is going on so they can cooperate with you. Similarly, communicate with your local authorities. Do not be adverse and do not be against talking to the police or going to the police station. Again, I know that it is easier for me to easier said than done, because I keep getting this from people that you are lawyers, you keep going. That's fine. We might be going, but it's still you can approach it. The doors are always open for anybody to go to these authorities, and they are very helpful. So you need to communicate with them well, so you do not run into trouble later on. So if your bus is traveling and taking employees in compliance with the law, then they are not stopped. And have an in-house and an external team for assistance. Forecast well. Till the 3rd May, at least these guidelines may or may not be applicable to your state. So that is something that you really have to be careful about. You have a team which can support you and which can help you in times of need. Apart from this, there are other conditions which have been imposed. For example, in the workplace, you need to have mandatory medical insurance, which the employer has to provide. The IRDAI, which is the Insurance Regulatory and Development Authority of India, has come out with guidelines which clearly specify that you need to have a pool of insurance policies, and employers have to be assisted with providing these insurance policy to the employees. Have your employee records on board. Know your employees. On the one hand, all of us know our customers, all of us know our clients. But what is most important is for your employee records to be updated. Have a legal audit and have a financial audit of all this. As far as your contracts are concerned, this, frankly, is the best time for you to evaluate all your major contracts, all your vendor contracts. Startups especially have this problem about the vendor management and business process continuity and stuff like that. Again, it is a very unfortunate time, but that does not mean that people are not cooperating. People are cooperating, and you have to capitalize on them. The path ahead may or may not be very easy, but I am sure that, as I said, it is not always doom and gloom. I'm quite sure that if you innovatively know when and how to apply these guidelines, it is not going to be that bad. And the other point that a lot of people ask me is that when it comes to Delhi especially, you may or may not you obviously now the lockdown has been extended, the status quo has been extended. So what does that mean? That basically means that you, I would say, have gotten more time to comply with and think of these guidelines and how they can be made applicable to your establishment, to your company. Because even when the lockdown is lifted, again, this is my own assessment and may or may not be true, but whenever the lockdown is lifted, the government of India also has a very gradual relaxation. It does not all of a sudden ensure that all of you come out. So even in cases where the lockdown is still continuing, the relaxation will be in phases, the relaxation will be periodically. So this is a good time to assess that when you have that kind of relaxation, are you in a position, both government policy wise, your internal policy wise, your contract wise, can you actually start businesses? How soon? How soon can you start functioning? And this is the right time to do that.